The Bible counts things. It tells you exactly how many shovels Babylon hauled away, the snuffers, the basins, the bronze pots and the fine gold spoons, every item stripped from the temple, written down and mourned by name in 2 Kings chapter 25. But the most sacred object in the history of the world is missing from the list: the golden throne of God Himself. The chest one man could approach once a year, and only with blood. No inventory of loot records it, no theft report, no funeral. And when Rome finally tore open the holiest room on earth, expecting to drag out a god, the soldiers found a bare stone floor and a silence that made a hardened general step backward into the light. For 2,000 years, people have hunted for the box. The hunt has been aimed at the wrong question the entire time. The Ark of the Covenant did not get lost. It was retired. And the reason God allowed it to vanish points straight at a Roman cross. 10th century before Christ, Jerusalem. The doors of Solomon's temple stood open, and the smoke of 1,000 sacrifices hung over the courts. The Levites carried the golden chest forward on poles that had never once been removed and slid it into a windowless room behind a veil so thick a man could lose his arm to the elbow in its folds. The moment they set it down, the cloud came. It poured into the room and out the doorway and filled the whole house until the priests could not stand up to do their work. The glory of the Lord had filled the house of God. 1 Kings 8, 10-11. This was a presence with weight, a presence that drove grown men to the floor. That was the Ark. Not a relic, not religious furniture. Scripture calls it God's footstool, the place where His feet rested on the earth. 1 Chronicles 28:2, Psalm 132:7. The one point in all creation where the holiness of the Creator pressed down into the world of dust and bone. Now look at what we have done with it. We turned it into an adventure. Caves, treasure maps, tunnels under the Temple Mount. A church in Ethiopia that swears it sits behind a curtain guarded by a single monk who can never leave. We have chased that box across continents, certain that if we dug in the right place, we would find it. The answer was never in a cave. It was in a prophecy. And to reach it, we have to follow one man into the dark. His name does not matter. He is the high priest, and it is the Day of Atonement, and he is about to walk into a room that has killed men for less than what he is about to do. He stands at the veil. On the other side, the dark. He has fasted, he has washed, he has tied a cord around his ankle, because if he dies in there, no one else is permitted to enter to pull the body out. They will drag him back by the rope. He lifts the censer of burning coals in one hand and the incense in the other, and his arms are already shaking. Do not look. Whatever you do, do not look at it. He steps through. The air changes the instant the veil falls behind him, thick with resin-sweet smoke that never fully clears, and underneath it, faint and old, the iron smell of last year's blood soaked into stone. No window, no lamp, only the dull glow of his coals against two golden shapes bent toward each other, wings arched over an empty space between them. He throws the incense onto the coals. He has to. The smoke must rise and hide the mercy seat before his eyes adjust, that he may not die. Leviticus 16:13. To see the glory unshielded is to be unmade. He waits for the cloud to thicken, breathing through his mouth, and his whole body knows the history of this room. He knows about Eli, the old priest who heard the ark had been captured in battle,
and fell backward off his seat and broke his neck. 1 Samuel 4:18. He knows men have died for touching it, for looking inside it, for treating it like furniture. One wrong step, one wrong word. When the smoke is thick enough, he dips his finger in the blood of the bull and then the goat, and he sprinkles it forward, onto the mercy seat, the dark drops spreading across the bright gold, one careful drop at a time. Leviticus 16:14-15. And in that golden lid is a word worth stopping for: the mercy seat. In Hebrew, kaporet, from kafar, to cover, to wipe away, to atone. Beneath that lid sat three things: the stone tablets of a law the people had shattered, a jar of manna that witnessed how they had complained, and a dead stick that budded to prove a priesthood they had tried to overthrow. Hebrews 9:4. The broken law, the ingratitude, the rebellion. Three exhibits of guilt stacked in a box. And the only thing standing between that evidence and the holiness above it was a lid, and the blood now soaking into it. The priest backs out without turning his back to the room. The cord goes slack. He is alive for one more year, and so is everyone he represents. Have you ever held something so tightly that it never crossed your mind God might one day ask you to let it go? Remember the blood on the gold, in the dark, behind the veil. We will see it again, in daylight, in the open, where the whole world is forced to watch.
622 before Christ. And the trail goes cold in the strangest way. King Josiah was tearing through Judah like a man putting out a house fire. His grandfather Manasseh had crammed the temple itself with idols and pagan altars. Josiah smashed them, burned them, ground them to dust. And in the middle of that great cleansing, he gave the Levites an order that should stop us cold. Put the holy ark in the house that Solomon built. You need not carry it on your shoulders. 2 Chronicles 35:3. Put it back. Which means, at some point, it had been taken out. Somewhere in the black years of Manasseh's idolatry, faithful priests had quietly carried the throne of God out of a defiled sanctuary and hidden it. In 622 BC, Josiah commanded it home. That is the last time anyone in all of Scripture sees the ark and tells us where it stands. Look hard. The door is closing. 36 years later, the sky over Jerusalem filled with cedar smoke. Nebuchadnezzar's army had camped outside the walls for 18 months. When the walls broke, the Babylonians came through the city like a tide. They burned the palace, they burned the houses, and they climbed the hill toward the temple. There is a boy in a doorway in the lower city that night. His mother has him by the wrist, pulling, but he will not move, because he is looking up at the hill where the great cedar beams of Solomon's roof have caught. And cedar does not burn quietly. It cracks and booms like something breaking its own bones. And he can smell it. The burning beams mixed with the spice stores of the temple, frankincense and cinnamon going up in a sweetness so wrong it turns his stomach. He has been told his whole short life that the God of all the earth lives in a golden box in a room on top of that hill. He lives in the box. The box is in the room. The room is burning. He cannot make the thought go anywhere after that. His mother drags him into the dark. Behind them, the hill glows. Every family on that slope was raised believing the box would protect them. Now the box is silent,
and the air is full of holy ash falling on ordinary roofs.
And here, the Bible does something that should raise the hair on your arms. The scribes who recorded that disaster were exact. They listed everything Babylon carried off: the bronze pillars, the great bronze sea, the pots, the fire pans, every vessel of fine gold and silver broken apart and hauled away. 2 Kings 25:13-17. They counted the spoons. The ark is not on the list. The single most valuable object in the kingdom, solid gold on every face, the first prize any conqueror seizes, is simply not there. Not captured, not destroyed, not rescued. And when Cyrus of Persia later sent the exiles home and returned the stolen sacred vessels, the ark is missing from that manifest too. The silence is deafening, but it is not empty. Jeremiah, sitting in the ash of the burned city, wrote a line that may be the most important clue we have. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. Lamentations 2:1. His footstool, the ark. God did not lose his throne in the chaos. By his own prophet's account, he released it. And Ezekiel had already seen it coming, the glory of the Lord lifting off the cherubim and leaving the temple before the Babylonians ever arrived. Ezekiel 10:18. God moved out before the enemy moved in. So where did it go? This is where the legends rush in to fill the silence. The famous one comes from 2 Maccabees, a book outside the Hebrew canon, which claims Jeremiah secretly carried the ark up Mount Nebo, sealed it in a cave, and said its location would stay hidden until God gathered his people again. 2 Maccabees 2:4-8. There is the Samaritan tradition, recorded by Josephus, that it lies on Mount Gerizim. There is the Ethiopian church, certain to this day that the true ark rests in Aksum. But the cave story dies on its own contradiction. The man supposedly hiding the ark for a future restoration is the same man who prophesied, in plain words, that the ark would never be missed and never be remade. You cannot secretly preserve something for the future while announcing it has no future. And to watch that whole treasure hunt collapse, we only need to stand beside the one man in history most determined to find something inside that room. 63 before Christ. Pompey the Great had taken Jerusalem after a brutal siege, and he wanted to see the God the Jews would die for. He had done this before, stripped the shrines of conquered nations across the world and carried their idols home in chains. That was what victory looked like. You took the enemy's God as a trophy. Torchlight shuddered against gold as he shoved past the last priest, who was on his knees with his hands open, begging. Pompey did not slow. He reached the veil, the curtain no foreigner had ever been allowed to touch, and gripped it. Show me the face the Jews would rather be slaughtered than let me see. He tore it aside. There was no face, no throne of beaten gold, no towering statue staring back at him in the dark, no chest, no cherubim, no tablets. Only a bare stone, barely 3 fingers high, and a silence so total, the most feared man alive could hear his own breathing and the guttering of his own torch. He stood there longer than his officers expected. He had expected to feel like a conqueror. He felt like a trespasser in an empty house. Josephus tells us Pompey was so unsettled by this imageless worship of a god who could not be seen or seized that he touched none of the treasure, and the next morning ordered the temple cleansed and the sacrifices resumed.
Sit with what that proves. The most powerful man in the world, armies at his back, hunting the physical God of Israel on purpose, and he found nothing. If there had ever been something there to seize, the search ended that day, in the hands of the man least likely to walk out empty. Have you ever gone looking for God in the exact place you last felt him, and found the room already bare? Because that room stayed bare for 500 years. The exiles came home and rebuilt. Herod later expanded the temple into a wonder of the ancient world. Gleaming stone, gold facing that threw the sun back into your eyes. From outside, glory. Inside, the Holy of Holies, where the Ark belonged, a single slab of rock the rabbis called the foundation stone. No ark, no tablets, no glory cloud, no fire. The presence that once flattened priests to the floor was gone. And every year, for 5 centuries, a man walked into that emptiness anyway. Picture the last of them, a high priest who knows the old stories, who knows what his ancestors walked toward. He steps through the veil on the Day of Atonement with his censer of coals, and there is no mercy seat to set them before. So he lowers the shovel of burning coals onto the bare foundation stone. He lifts his hand with the blood, and he sprinkles it toward the empty air where the throne of God used to sit. I am throwing blood at nothing. My father did this. His father did this. One man, one handful of incense, 500 days of atonement aimed at an empty space. Generation after generation of priests grew old performing the holiest act of their faith in front of nothing, and died without ever seeing it answered. What was God doing with all that silence? He was prying their fingers loose. Solomon himself had glimpsed the problem on the very day he installed the ark, when he looked at the glory filling his temple and prayed, almost in disbelief, "Will God indeed dwell on the earth? Behold, heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain you. How much less this house that I have built?" 1 Kings 8:27. The maker of the universe was never going to fit in a box. But people are relentless. We want a God we can locate, carry into battle, keep in a room, visit on our terms. The 5 centuries of emptiness broke them, slowly and painfully, of the idea that God could be contained or possessed. The empty room was not abandonment. It was preparation. And the man chosen to explain it had watched the city burn. Jeremiah lived through it all, the temple falling, the people dragged off in chains. Picture him standing in the wreckage of a courtyard, ash still drifting, addressing people who have lost everything and want to know only one thing. When do we get the box back? When do we rebuild the throne? And the prophet has to open his mouth and hand them a verdict from the throne itself. He does not soften it. He delivers it like a sentence. In those days, declares the Lord, they shall no more say, "The ark of the covenant of the Lord." You will stop even speaking of it. It shall not come to mind. You will stop thinking of it. Or be remembered or missed. You will not even feel the wound of its absence. It shall not be made again, and no one will ever rebuild it. 4 blows, and every one nails the treasure hunt shut. Not mentioned, not remembered, not missed, never remade. If God meant to recover the ark one day and set it back in a future temple, the prophecy is incoherent.
You do not forbid the rebuilding of something you intend to bring back. You do not promise no one will miss a thing you plan to restore. Then why? Why would the people who built their whole identity on this object not even feel its loss? The next verse answers. At that time, Jerusalem shall be called the throne of the Lord, and all nations shall gather to it. The ark was a throne for one nation, in one room, behind one veil. It was about to be replaced by a throne for every nation, with no room and no veil at all. This is the same Jeremiah who promised a new covenant, one where the law is no longer carved on cold stone and locked in a chest, but written on the human heart by the Spirit of God. The ark did not vanish because something went wrong. It vanished because something was about to go gloriously right. The shadow was being cleared because the substance was almost here. There is a kind of empty space that is not a grave at all. It is a room being swept out for an arrival. Now stay with me, because the most beautiful word in this story is one most people have never heard. When Greek-speaking Jews translated the Hebrew scriptures, they needed a word for kaporet, the mercy seat, that golden lid where blood met holiness. They chose hilasterion, the place of atonement, the place where wrath is turned aside by blood. They used it again and again for that covering on the ark. Centuries later, the Apostle Paul reached for a word to describe what God did at the cross. Out of the whole Greek language, he chose that one. He wrote that God publicly displayed Jesus as a hilasterion, a propitiation through faith in his blood. Romans 3:25. Paul is not being poetic, he is being precise. He is saying Jesus Christ is the mercy seat. The thing that vanished from the temple did not stay vanished. It came back wearing flesh. And watch where God set it this time, not behind a veil, in the dark, approached by one man once a year, out on a hill, in the daylight, in front of everyone. There was a priest who saw it happen, not at the cross, at the veil. It is the 9th hour, and a priest is in the holy place, tending the incense, when the day goes wrong. The light has been strange for 3 hours, a noon that turned to dusk with no cloud to explain it, and the people in the courts below have gone quiet in the way crowds go quiet when something is coming. He keeps his eyes on his work. Tend the coals, trim the lamps. Do not think about the dark room on the other side of the great curtain, the curtain as tall as 4 men and as thick as a man's hand, the barrier that has hidden the empty throne of God for 500 years. Then the ground moves, not a tremor, a heave, as if the hill itself flinched. He grabs the table to keep his feet. Stone dust sifts down from the ceiling. He hears a sound he has no category for, a long, tearing groan from somewhere above and behind him, the sound of something enormous coming apart. He turns toward the veil, and the veil is splitting from the top. He watches the tear race downward, top to bottom, the heavy fabric peeling open like a wound, and he knows, every priest knows, that no human hand starts a tear at the top of a curtain that tall. This came from above. This was torn by something reaching down. The two halves fall away, and for the first time in the history of his people, an ordinary priest is staring straight into the Holy of Holies, into the place where to look was to die. There is no lightning, no fire, no glory striking him dead where he stands. There is a bare stone 3 fingers high and an empty room,
exposed to the daylight pouring through the torn veil. The secret the priests had guarded for 5 centuries is hanging open in front of the whole temple. There is nothing here. There was nothing here. And outside the walls, on a hill a few hundred yards away, at that exact hour, a man has just torn the veil of his own flesh and breathed his last. Matthew 27:51. Remember the blood on the gold? The dark room, the smoke, the trembling hand, the careful drops on the golden lid? Now the blood is on the wood, not an animal's sprinkled by a frightened priest, his own, poured out in the open air. Not hidden behind a curtain, held up on a hill where soldiers gamble at his feet. Not for one nation once a year, but for the whole world once and for all. Hebrews 9:12. The same atonement, a new throne. The mercy seat carried out of the dark and lifted into the sun. The veil did not tear by accident at the moment he died. It tore because the room it protected had just been made obsolete forever. There was no ark left to guard, because the true mercy seat was hanging outside the city, and the way to God had just been thrown open to every human being alive. Even the 3 things in the old box find their ending here. The broken law inside the chest, fulfilled at last by the only man who ever kept it. The jar of manna, fulfilled by the one who called himself the true bread from heaven that gives life without end. And the dead rod that budded, fulfilled by a man nailed to dead wood, who 3 days later sprang back to life, vindicated forever as the eternal high priest. The ark was always pointing here. We were just staring at the signpost instead of following where it pointed. So why did God allow the Ark of the Covenant to disappear before Jesus? Because a shadow has no business lingering after the sun has risen. To keep searching the deserts and the caves and the tunnels for that golden box is to crawl around at noon, hunting a shadow the daylight already swallowed. The Ark was never the destination. It was a teacher, a 500-year lesson in the weight of holiness, the cost of sin, the absolute necessity of blood. The moment that lesson was fulfilled in the body of Jesus Christ, the teacher was allowed to leave the room. It did not vanish into tragedy. It vanished into fulfillment. And there is one last sighting in all of Scripture, not in a history book, not on a treasure map. The Apostle John, caught up into heaven, looked and saw the temple of God thrown open, and inside it stood the Ark of his covenant, ringed with lightning and thunder and a great earthquake. Revelation 11:19. Some read it as a picture of God's unbreakable faithfulness to his promises. Others believe it is the true, eternal original of which the wooden chest on earth was only ever a fading copy. Either way, the message lands the same. The earthly box disappeared because it was temporary. The reality it pointed to stands in heaven, and it cannot be destroyed. You will never need to find the ark. The veil is already torn. The throne room already stands open. The mercy seat is no longer locked in the dark, waiting for one qualified man to approach it once a year. It was carried out into the daylight and held up where anyone from any nation can come. Which leaves a different question, and it is not about a golden box. There is an empty space somewhere in your own life, a room that went silent, an absence you have been carrying as a loss, a thing you were certain you could never live without. The people of Israel stood in front of their empty room for 5 centuries before they understood what God had been doing in it. I would love to hear you sit with that in the comments. What is the empty space in your life you have been mourning? Tell me. And if this opened the story up in a way you had never seen, take a moment to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone still searching the wrong room. Because the box was never the point. The torn veil was.